coming to you from Bainbridge Island, where the autumn light is slanting low, and the air finally has the edge that makes you reach for something warm. This is episode 37, and today we're exploring something perfectly suited for this season: poetry that pairs with soup. We are talking about poems that understand comfort and sustenance, that know why we gather around tables when the world gets cold. When we're not recording, my co-host Ben and I, my husband, and we run Bainbridge Island Press, but Poetics Podcast is where we get to dig into why this art form matters. Today we are looking at how poetry and soup share the same essential qualities. Both take simple ingredients and transform them into something that sustains us through the darker months. So grab your coffee, grab your tea, or better yet, grab a bowl of something warm, and let's dig in. We're about to explore poems by Neruda, Sandburg, and Joy Harjo, three poets who understand that nourishment is never just about food. This is Poetics Podcast. So I actually have 4 poems. There's one more that I wanted to read today. Soup is a dish that is it's a divisive dish. I have met people who love soup. I think most people love soup, but I speak as a soup lover. There's something really wonderful about soup. There's something that can be comforting. It feels like home. It also, if you order soup in a restaurant, then they are going to be adding things that are different. It's not going to be your normal chicken noodle soup. But also it's very cultural. Soup is just one of those things that speaks to your culture. The food that you have around you is going to go into the soup. I think soup is fascinating just because it is so diverse, and so regional and so personal. And I think that it is just as important to a culture as dance is, which I understand is quite a bold statement. And I encourage dancers to reflect on this and maybe tell me why I'm right or wrong, but I'm probably right. But also, when you add soup into a poem, it changes the poem. And so what are you going to be talking about? If you were writing a poem and you included soup, how does that change the nature of the poem? It all of a sudden does not become an international poem. It shrinks everything down to something very, very intimate and something very small and something very personal and most likely generational. It speaks for history. Soup is an incredible medium for poetry. So there's a few poems that I wanted to go over today. So we're going to start with Carl Sandburg. He had a really interesting one. So this poem is it is a very brief meditation on soup as a metaphor for the human experience. It is characteristically imagistic. It's modernist. It's using soup to talk about what we're made of. It is this mixture of our experiences, our memories, our struggles that are all simmering together. And this poem is compact but flavorful, suggesting that we are all soups of a kind. Sandburg brings his working class Chicago sensibility to soup, and he's seeing it as both a literal sustenance and a metaphor for life's complexities. This poem, I think, refuses sentimentality, and instead it is presenting soup as honest, necessary, and revealing. Let me see where it is. I can't find it. I have so many notes up. Okay, I have it. If you saw my desk, it would make a lot more sense. Okay, this is Carl Sandburg, and his poem is titled Soup. I saw a famous man eating soup. I say he was lifting a fat broth into his mouth with a spoon. His name was in the newspapers that day, spelled out in tall black headlines, and thousands of people were talking about him. When I saw him, he sat bending his head over a plate, putting soup in his mouth with a spoon. So this is very indicative of the Images time. It is reflective of William Carlos Williams' Red Wheelbarrow. This is the scene, and the poet is responsible for observing and describing the scene. What does the scene mean? That is for the reader to bring, because we bring our tool bag of experiences with us into every poem. And it's the same with art. When we view a piece of art, whether it is an experimental art or a modern art or a classical art or whatever genre, when we approach art as a reader or as an audience, we are bringing ourselves and our experiences with us. And so when I look at a painting of a man sitting at a table and the only thing on the table is an orange, and everything else is brown, and there's nothing on the walls, and the room is empty, my experience would tell me this is a picture probably from 1700s, probably, maybe 1600s, but it would be a reflection of the Protestant ethic of simplicity and removing things from your life other than your religious faith, which is the orange. I have that. There's actually a painting that I saw at the Seattle Art Museum, and it had that, I think. It might have been somewhere else. I don't remember. I think it was. But it was just so interesting because that was the entire painting. And I'm like, oh, I know exactly what he's talking about, which is so fascinating because all these symbols mean something. So when we approach this poem, it is not a complicated poem. I saw a famous man eating soup. I say, this is what I thought was interesting, was the narrator is, the author, the poet, is actually in here. I say, when I saw him. So that allows us to experience the voyeuristic display with the poet, which is nice. That's polite. I say he was lifting a fat broth into his mouth with a spoon. That is different than if you wrote, I saw a poor woman eating soup. I say she was lifting a thin broth into her mouth with a cracked spoon. Those symbols, which that's not the poem, I'm just saying as an example. Those symbols mean something different. So this soup is nourishing and fatty, and it is being eaten by a famous man whose name was in the newspapers today, spelled out in tall black headlines, and thousands of people were talking about him. So this soup means something different. This soup is making him fat. He is not wanting. This is not a soup that is this is not a poverty soup. Also, it's interesting that he was not eating something else like meat. If he was eating meat, that would change the poem entirely. I saw a famous man eating a steak. It was rare. The juices dripped down his wrist, which also, I'm just making this up. But that would be a completely different poem. And so if I was to analyze this, I would say that it's actually really interesting that you have this soup that is intimate and It is a simple dish, and it is telling us about this man that maybe he still has roots to his grandmother's soup. Maybe he's eating this soup because his name was in the newspapers that day, spelled out in tall black headlines. Maybe something happened. Maybe he lost something. Maybe this is recovering. Maybe he is trying to heal from a great loss. We don't know. But it means something. And I think that that's really interesting. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to do Neruda. Ode to Soup by Neruda. All right, let me find the paper on that one. Okay, I got so involved in soup that I got the title wrong. This is by Neruda, and it is Ode to Conger Chowder. So this poem was written in 1954, just after Neruda returned to Chile from political exile, and it is a homecoming to Chilean flavors and traditions. This dish is still served throughout Chile, and many restaurants reference Neruda's poem on their menus, which is cool. I'm reading. I've never been to Chile. This poem is so interesting because it has erotic undertones and political undertones, and it's celebrating working class coastal Chilean cuisine by Neruda. I'll read it and then we'll do an analysis. Okay, so this is Ode to Conger Chowder by Pablo Neruda. In the storm-tossed Chilean sea lives the rosy conger, giant eel of snowy flesh. And in Chilean stewpots along the coast was born the chowder, thick and succulent, a boon to man. You bring the conger skinned to the kitchen, its mottled skin slips off like a glove, leaving the grape of the sea exposed to the world. Naked, the tender eel glistens, prepared to serve our appetites. Now you take garlic first, caress that precious ivory, smell its irate fragrance, and then blend the minced garlic with onion and tomato until the onion is the color of gold. Meanwhile, steam our regal ocean prawns, and when they are tender, when the savor is set in sauce, combining the liquors of the ocean and the clear water released from the light of the onion, then you add the eel, that it may be immersed in glory, that it may steep in the oils of the something that has, I'm sorry, there's a word that has been removed. Shrink and be saturated. Now all that remains is to drop a dollop of cream into the concoction, a heavy rose, then slowly deliver the treasure to the flame until in the chowder we are warmed, the essences of Chile, and to the table come, newlywed, the savors of land and sea, that in this dish you may know heaven. Okay, there was a word in that poem that was missing. There was actually asterisks, and I didn't know if it was a word that it was a swear word or something, and I looked it up. It was pot. I have no idea why that was taken out. So the line should have been, in the clear water released from the light of the onion, then you add the eel, that it may be immersed in glory, that it may steep in the oils of the pot, shrink and be saturated. That was the word that was missing. I looked it up for us. That was it's one of those things. Anyways, so I like this poem enormously. It focuses on the food and the act of creating this stew. How personal is this? Like, I can completely see how, like, from a restaurant or from a kitchen, any person could hold the garlic. Any person could hold the onion. And why is that in a poem? Why do we need to say the ingredient list in a poem? This poem is walking through the entire process of preparing this dish, from skinning the eel to caressing the garlic to steaming the prawns to finally adding the cream right before serving. This is both a recipe and a love letter to Chilean cuisine, and it is ending with the promise that in this dish you may know heaven. And that's probably how he felt when he went back to Chile and he ate it, and he's just like, I remember this flavor. I remember how this tastes, and it tastes like home. And that's comforting, and that's rewarding. It's so nice. It is such an intimate pairing with soup, because soup is a recipe that transforms into this central poetry. Neruda is taking each step of cooking and making it an act of devotion. The garlic becomes precious ivory. It has an irate fragrance. The eel is immersed in glory. The cream becomes a heavy rose. This poem just is capturing this alchemy of soup making, with all these ingredients from the land and the sea coming together newlywed to create something transcendent. This was part of his elemental odes, and it was odes celebrating simple everyday things. So there's also an ode to socks. This poem, I think, is paying attention to humble acts like making soup, in the same way of humble acts like writing poetry. All of the sensory details, the smelling, the caressing, watching ingredients transform. It makes you taste the chowder through the language. I think that this poetry pairs well with soup. Okay, let's go to the next one. Actually is by Simpson. Let me find that. Okay, this one is titled A Story About Chicken Soup, and it's by Louis Simpson. Louis Simpson was he was an interesting guy. There's a lot here. He was a Jamaican-born poet of Scottish and Russian heritage. He moved to the United States at 17 to study at Columbia University. He served in the 101st Airborne Division during World War II. He saw combat in France, Belgium, and Germany. He earned his PhD from Columbia, and he taught at various universities. He was a contemporary of other confessional poets like Lowell, and his career followed a very distinctive path. So in his early works, in 1949, he wrote The Arrivists. Is it The Arrive? Yeah. I just ordered new reading glasses. It's a problem. He also did A Dream of Governors. He featured formal verse that was influenced by Eliot and Auden, but he was also including his wartime experiences, and which is reflective of Eliot. I think that his style evolved towards simpler diction and more free verse, and so later on he has a piece of work called At the End of the Open Road, and that won the Pulitzer Prize. But that was a significant shift in in his work. I like his poetry. So, anyways, he's really fascinating. But this is his poem called A Story About Chicken Soup. In my grandmother's house, there was always chicken soup and talk of the old country, mud and boards, poverty, the snow falling down the necks of lovers. Now and then, out of her savings, she sent them a dowry. Imagine the rice-powdered faces and the smell of the bride like chicken soup. But the Germans killed them. I know it's in bad taste to say it, but it's true. The Germans killed them all. In the ruins of Berdisk's garden, a child with yellow hair ran out of a doorway. A German girl child, cuckoo, all skin and bones, not even enough to make chicken soup. She sat by the stream and smiled. Then, as we splashed in the sun, she laughed at us. We had killed her mechanical brothers, so we forgave her. The sun was shining. The shadows of the lovers have disappeared. They are all eyes. They have some demand on me. They want me to be more serious than I want to be. They want me to stick in their mud hole where no one is elegant. They want me to wear old clothes. They want me to be poor, to sleep in a room with many others, not walk in the painted sunshine to a summer house, but to live in the tragic world forever. Now, that's not the most comforting poem, but how does that soup work in the poem? That's such an interesting poem to use soup in. No one is eating the soup. Everyone smells like soup. The smell of the bride like chicken soup. The German girl child, not even big enough to make chicken soup. This one is so interesting. The soup goes in us in the same way that our tragedies go in us, the same way that our suffering goes in us, the same way that our memories live in us. And also there's a lot of different people in this poem. There's the grandmother's house, there's the old country, there are people who died, there are people who were killed, there were children, there were people who are called they. They want me to stick in their mud hole. They want me to wear old clothes. There's a lot of things in here that are being referenced, and we aren't told who they are exactly. When he says, they want me to be poor, to sleep in a room with many others, there are many others. There's a lot of people in this, and what they are eating is soup. What does that mean? Is this a nourishing soup that we saw in Sandburg's poem? Clearly not. But still, it's so interesting that in this poem, full of grief that we are eating, there is something that we are taking in. There is something universal that we understand. We understand this grief in the same way that we understand the soup. And the soup is there's a word that I can't think of, but the soup is a platform for us to understand what this grief looks like in war. There is grief in war. There is grief from the victims. There's grief from the people. There's grief in the children. There's grief generationally. We understand it in the same way that we understand soup. So there's, I think, one other. And I'm going to move on to Harjo because this one was a little heavier, but still, it pairs well with soup. Okay. Now, Joy Harjo is a ridiculously wonderful poet. She was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She's a member of the Creek Nation. She earned her BA in the University of New Mexico. She has been in a number of other places. She was the poet laureate of the United States. She was the first Native American to hold this position. Her poetry mostly draws on First Nation storytelling, feminist traditions, and indigenous myths. She explores the themes of remembrance, of survival. Her work is deeply autobiographical, and it's deeply rooted in the natural world. So, beyond poetry, she's also an amazing she just is fascinating. She's a wonderful musician. Did you know she plays the saxophone? I didn't know that. So, that all being said, to just showcase how inspiring she is, this is her poem, and it is called Perhaps the World Ends Here. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies teethe at the corners. They scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make men at it. We make women. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor falling down selves, and as we put ourselves back together once again at the table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth on this table. We have prepared our parents for burial here. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the sweet last bite. This is celebrating the kitchen table as the center of human life. I have loved this poem for years and years and years. It is where we eat. It is where we grow. It is the witness to all of life's moments from birth to death. It is a sacred ground. And although this is not explicitly about soup, it captures the communal sense of soup making and soup sharing. I think this poem is soup itself. I think this poem is nourishing. I think it is communal. I think it is essential. I think that Harjo elevates this everyday ritual of eating together into something cosmic. The world begins at a kitchen table. And I think that, like soup, this poem is bubbling with various ingredients. This poem accumulates moments of babies teething, of children learning, lovers remembers, the repetition of at this table. At this table. It's this grounding rhythm, kind of like stirring a pot. I think this poem pairs well with soup because soup is the ultimate table food. You can't eat soup on the couch. You can't. Soup is a table food. It demands that we sit, we slow down, we share from the same pot. You can't eat soup standing up. You can't eat soup in the car. you can't eat soup when you're rushing. And Harjo understands that our most profound human experiences do not happen in grand venues, but they happen in the humble act of sharing food. Soup represents what happens at this table. There is sustenance, yes, but also there is story and memory and survival. This is a beautiful poem that I think represents what it means to be human. It's just so lovely, and it's one of my favorites. So I think that this is the perfect soup poem. I think just like a good soup stock, I think every poet adds their own essential flavor to our understanding of why soup matters. And that's all the soup I have for today. So if you have enjoyed diving into the world of soup and verse with us, please join us next time. We've got more poets to meet, more poems to explore, and more literary adventures to share. So until then, keep reading, keep writing, keep that soup pot warm, and keep poetry close to your heart. Thank you for joining Poetics Podcast, where we bring poetry to life one verse at a time.